The hot California sun was beating down on the asphalt of Baker Street when Mark Johnson's truck pulled into Pedro Motors, a local auto repair shop. Dust rose in a cloud behind the battered Ford that had served him faithfully for the past 3 months, ever since he returned from Afghanistan to his hometown of Visalia. The city greeted him with the same hot air and smell of orange groves as it had 20 years ago when he was a teenager dreaming of escaping anywhere. Now at 32, Mark was grateful for the predictability. "Hey Johnson, don't be late again!" shouted Pedro Vasquez, the owner of the auto repair shop, wiping his greasy hands on his overalls. Pedro was one of the few people who had given Mark a chance without asking too many questions about why a former U.S. Army sergeant had agreed to work as a mechanic. "Sorry, Pedro. The bank is holding up the paperwork for my apartment," Mark said, pulling his overalls over his jeans and t-shirt. His hands, covered with shrapnel scars, automatically reached for his tools. Working with cars was calming. Everything was logical and predictable. If you know what you're doing, you can fix what's broken. His first weeks in Visalia were a blur. Mark rented a room in a motel on the outskirts of town, avoiding crowds and old acquaintances. The Army psychologist had warned him about the difficulties of adjustment, but no one could have prepared him for this strange emptiness. In Afghanistan, every day brought danger, but also purpose. Here, "Mark, we've got a Honda with a problem gearbox. Can you take a look?" Pedro pointed to a silver car in the corner of the garage. The next 4 hours passed in the usual rhythm. His hands worked automatically, while his thoughts wandered far away. By lunchtime, Mark felt a familiar pain in his right shoulder. An old injury was reminding him of itself in the heat. He stretched, rubbed his neck, and decided to go to the nearest clinic for some painkillers. The Kauai Health Medical Center was located in a modern building in the city center. Mark was nervous in hospitals. Too many memories of field hospitals and the smell of disinfectants mixed with blood. But the pain was becoming unbearable. "Next!" A melodious voice rang out from the reception area. Mark looked up and froze. Standing behind the desk was a woman in her late 20s with chestnut hair pulled back in a neat bun and green eyes that radiated a special warmth. Her white coat bore a name tag, Sarah Taylor, nurse. "What can I do for you?" she asked. And Mark suddenly realized that he had been standing there silently staring at her for several seconds. "My shoulder, an old injury. I need something for the pain," he said, handing her the medical file he had started after his return. Sarah glanced at the documents, her gaze lingering on the entry about his military service. "Afghanistan?" she asked quietly. Mark nodded, expecting the usual platitudes about heroism and gratitude he had heard from most people. Instead, Sarah simply said, "Go to room 3. Dr. Miller will see you." But when Dr. Miller was busy with an emergency, it was Sarah who performed the initial examination. Her hands were gentle but confident as she checked the mobility of his joint. "Have you been back long?" she asked, writing something down on his chart. 3 months. Mark watched her face. There was no pity in it, only professional concern. "Is it hard to adjust?" The question was unexpected. Most people avoided such topics. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but work helps. I'm a mechanic for Pedro Vasquez. I know that place. Pedro's a good man. He always helps people who need a second chance." Sarah smiled, and something in that smile made Mark's heart beat faster. Dr. Miller finally appeared and prescribed some painkillers. But as Mark was about to leave, he turned to Sarah. "Would you like to go for a coffee sometime? When would you be free?" She hesitated for a second, then nodded. "I finish at 6. Do you know the Celestino Cafe on Acacia Street?" Their first date took place in a cozy Italian cafe that Mark remembered from his childhood. They talked until late in the evening. Sarah told him that she had grown up here in Visalia, studied nursing in Sacramento, and then returned home. "And your family?" Mark asked. "I have a brother, James. He works in the school district, teaching history in high school. My parents died a few years ago," she said with a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm sorry," Mark said, reaching out and covering her hand with his. "And you? Was anyone waiting for you at home?" "No one," he shrugged. "My parents moved to Oregon when I was in the service. There was no particular reason to come back except habit, I guess. It's the only place I can call home." Sarah studied his face intently, Sometimes home isn't a place, it's the people, she said quietly. The next few months flew by in a blur. Mark and Sarah saw each other every weekend, and then on weekdays after work. She introduced him to her brother James, a thin man with kind eyes and a penchant for philosophical musings. James welcomed Mark warmly, although Mark sometimes caught him studying him. "Sarah means a lot to me," James said one day when they were alone in the kitchen while Sarah was preparing dinner. "She's been through a lot, more than most people can imagine." "What do you mean?" Mark felt a slight uneasiness. "She just deserves happiness. Real happiness." James didn't elaborate, but his words stuck in Mark's mind. By fall, Mark realized he was in love. Sarah was everything he didn't know he was looking for. She calmed his nightmares with her mere presence, knew how to listen without judging, and gave him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. When he woke up from another nightmare about explosions and the screams of his comrades, all he had to do was hear her steady breathing nearby to return to reality. In November, he proposed. It was simple, without unnecessary words, in the same Celestino cafe where they had first had coffee together. "Marry me," he said, holding out a box with a simple but beautiful ring. Sarah froze, pressing her hand to her chest. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Mark, I know I'm not perfect. I have issues that I haven't fully worked through yet. But with you, I feel whole for the first time in years." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." The wedding was modest, with only close friends, and James as a witness. Pedro closed his auto repair shop for the day and came to congratulate them. The mayor of Visalia, an old friend of the Taylor family, personally officiated the ceremony at the town hall. Mark rented a small house on Redwood Street, in a quiet neighborhood with neat lawns and old oak trees. To him, accustomed to barracks and tents, it seemed like a palace. Sarah enthusiastically set about furnishing it, turning the empty rooms into a cozy family home. "This will be our bedroom," she said, standing in the large room with a window overlooking the garden. "And this one can be converted into a study, or a nursery when the time comes." Mark hugged her from behind, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I like the sound of that." The first months of married life were like a honeymoon that went on and on. Mark woke up every morning feeling grateful that this amazing person had chosen him. Sarah made breakfast before her shift at the hospital. They had dinner together, watched old movies on the weekends. The only thing that bothered Mark a little was Sarah's secretiveness. She almost never talked about her childhood or teenage years and avoided questions about old friends. When he found old photos or documents in the house, she quickly put them away, explaining that she wanted to live in the present, not the past. Everyone has a right to privacy, Mark told himself. After all, he himself didn't like to talk about certain episodes of his military service. But sometimes, at night, when Sarah thought he was asleep, Mark noticed her crying quietly, her face buried in her pillow. When he asked her what was wrong, she said she was just tired from work or worried about a difficult patient. The winter in Visalia was mild but rainy. Mark set up a small workshop in the garage where he worked on the motorcycle he had bought before they were married. Sarah often brought him coffee and sat next to him, watching him work. "You like fixing things," she remarked one day. "It's nice when something broken starts working again," Mark said, wiping his hands on a rag. "In the army, too many things were broken beyond repair." Sarah nodded understandingly. "That's why I love my job too, helping people get better." By spring, their life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mark got a promotion at the auto repair shop. Pedro trusted him with the most difficult repairs. Sarah talked about the possibility of transferring to the intensive care unit. They even started saving money for a vacation. They wanted to go to Yellowstone. "You know, I never thought I'd be this happy," Mark said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Me neither," Sarah took his hand. "You've given me something I never even dreamed of." "What do you mean?" "The chance to be myself, the real me." She paused. "Sometimes I feel like you see me better than I see myself." Mark was touched by her words, though he didn't fully understand their meaning. Later, when he thought back on that evening, the phrase would take on a whole new meaning. May brought heat and the scent of blooming orange trees to Visalia. Mark woke up to the sound of running water. Sarah was taking a shower before her morning shift. He stretched, enjoying a rare night without nightmares, and glanced at the clock. It was 6:30. He had time to eat breakfast in peace before work. Throwing on an old t-shirt, he went down to the kitchen and put the coffee on. That's when he saw her phone on the table. The screen lit up with an incoming message. Mark wasn't going to peek, but the text was clearly visible. "Sarah, we need to talk. We can't hide this forever. Dr. G." "Dr. G," Mark muttered. Sarah had never mentioned any doctor she was texting. Maybe a colleague from the hospital? "What are you doing in there?" Sarah's voice made him jump. She was standing in the doorway, still wet from her shower, her hair wrapped in a towel. "I'm making coffee. Your phone was ringing." Mark pointed to the device, trying to sound as natural as possible. Sarah quickly grabbed her phone, glanced at the screen, and Mark noticed her shoulders tense up. "Just spam," she muttered, deleting the message. Sarah was unusually quiet at breakfast. She usually talked about her plans for the day, discussed the news, or just chatted about this and that. Today, however, she chewed her toast mechanically, staring at her plate. "Everything okay?" Mark asked. "Sure, just thinking about work." She looked up and smiled, but the smile seemed forced. "We have a difficult operation today. I'm assisting." Mark wanted to ask for more details, but Sarah had already jumped up, gathering her bag. "I'm late. See you tonight." She kissed him on the cheek and hurried to the door. All day long, thoughts of the strange message kept Mark from resting. He made several mistakes while repairing the Chevrolet's transmission, which was unlike him. Pedro noticed his distraction. "Hey, Mark, what's wrong with you today? Are you in a daze?" "Sorry, Pedro. I didn't sleep well," Mark lied, tightening the bolt with more force than necessary. "Problems at home?" Pedro was an experienced man, and it was difficult to fool him. "No, everything's fine. You know, when you live alone for a long time, it takes time to get used to family life." "I understand, but your Sarah is a good woman. I like the way she looks at you, like you're the most precious thing she has." Those words should have reassured Mark, but instead they made him even more anxious. If Sarah really felt that way about him, why was she hiding something important? That evening, Sarah came home later than usual, looking tired. "The operation took longer than expected," she explained, collapsing onto the sofa. "Tell me how it went." Mark sat down next to her and put his arm around her shoulders. "It's complicated. A middle-aged man, car accident, multiple fractures. The doctors fought for him for 6 hours." Sarah pressed herself against him. "Sometimes I think about how much pain people have to endure, how many secrets each person hides." The last sentence sounded particularly meaningful. Mark felt that she was not just talking about the patient. "Sarah, everyone has a past. That's normal. But there shouldn't be any secrets between a husband and wife," he said cautiously. She froze in his arms. "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific. It's just that sometimes I feel like you're hiding something from me. If there are problems, we can solve them together." Sarah straightened up and looked him in the eyes. "Mark, I love you more than you can imagine, but there are things, parts of my life that are very painful to talk about. It doesn't mean I don't trust you. I just need time." "How much time?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Maybe I'll be ready soon. In the meantime, can you just trust me?" Mark nodded, though inside he felt a knot of anxiety. He kissed her forehead, feeling her hands tremble. The next few days passed in a tense atmosphere. Sarah tried to act normal, but Mark noticed how she flinched at the sound of the phone, how she hurriedly read messages and immediately deleted them. One evening, he heard her talking quietly on the phone in the bedroom. "I understand that it's risky. No, I'm not ready yet. Give me a little more time." When Mark went upstairs, the conversation had ended. Sarah pretended to be choosing clothes for the next day. "Who were you talking to?" he asked as casually as possible. "James. He's having problems at work. One of his students is complaining about his grades," she replied too quickly, too rehearsed. Mark knew she was lying, but decided not to press her. Instead, he began to observe her, carefully, unobtrusively, using the skills he had acquired in the army. He noticed that Sarah always received messages at the same time, around noon. He noticed that some new documents had appeared in her bag, which she was hiding from him. He noticed that on Saturdays, when he was working in the garage, she would leave for a few hours and then say she had been to the gym or shopping, but she never brought anything new home. The turning point came at the end of May. Mark came home from work earlier than usual because he had a headache, and Pedro let him go home. As he pulled up to the house, he saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. It was a dark blue Lexus with the doctor's license plate. Mark parked on the street and quietly entered the house through the back door. Muffled voices came from the living room. He recognized Sarah's voice and an unfamiliar male voice. "Sarah, you can't put this off forever. Sooner or later he'll find out. It's better if you tell him the truth." "I understand, Dr. Graham, but he's only just adjusted after the army. He's suffering from post-traumatic stress. News like this could destroy him. What if he finds out by accident? It'll be even worse. I need more time to find the right words, the right moment." "There may not be time. One of your old acquaintances may recognize you. In a small town like this, secrets don't stay secret for long." Mark tensed up. What secret were they talking about? What could be so serious? "Dr. Graham, you've been watching me for 7 years. You know what I've been through to become who I am. Mark is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I can't lose him. But basing a marriage on a lie, it's not a lie. It's just not the whole truth. I'm the same Sarah he fell in love with." Mark felt his heart pounding in his chest. What did those words mean? What did the doctor know about Sarah's past? And what was this truth that could break him? He carefully climbed the stairs, trying not to creak the steps. In the bedroom, in the dresser drawer where Sarah kept her documents, he began to search for answers. Most of the papers were ordinary: health insurance, work references, education documents. But in the far corner of the drawer, his fingers found a thick folder. Inside were medical documents dated 7 years ago. Mark read, not understanding the medical terms at first, but gradually the picture began to clear. Consultations with an endocrinologist, psychological reports, consent forms for surgery, sex reassignment, he read aloud, and the world around him seemed to turn upside down. There were photographs in the folder, old pictures of a man he didn't recognize, but whose features seemed familiar. A man of about 22, with short hair and a square jaw. Under the photo was written, "Samuel Taylor, before therapy." Mark leafed through the documents as if in a trance. Reports on hormone therapy, records of surgical procedures, psychological assessments of gender dysphoria. Everything was signed by the same doctor, Dr. Michael Graham. "Mark?" He turned around. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her face white as a sheet. Behind her, he could make out the silhouette of an older man in a suit. "Sarah," Mark began, but his voice trembled so much that he couldn't continue. "I can explain," she whispered, taking a step forward. "Explain?" Mark stood up, the documents falling from his hands and scattering across the floor. "Explain what? That my wife is you?" He couldn't say the words. The world he had so carefully built over the past few months was crumbling before his eyes. The person he loved, trusted, and considered his salvation turned out to be completely different from who she seemed to be. "Mark, I'm the same Sarah you fell in love with. Nothing has changed." She reached out to him, but he recoiled. "Nothing has changed? Are you kidding me?" His voice was a mixture of pain and anger. "You lied to me all this time!" "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you. That's the same thing," he shouted, and Dr. Graham took a step back. "You married me knowing I didn't know the truth." "Because the truth doesn't matter. What matters is what we have." "It matters to me!" Mark grabbed one of the photos. "Is this person you? Is this who you were?" Sarah began to cry. "Yes, it's me. But that's not who I am. I'm a woman, Mark. I've always been a woman. I was just born in the wrong body." "Oh my God!" Mark sank down onto the bed, pressing his palms against his temples. "I need time to think. I can't discuss this right now." "Mark, please don't go. Let's talk." Sarah knelt down in front of him. "No, not now. I need to be alone." He got up and walked past her toward the door. "Where are you going?" "I don't know. I just don't know." Mark ran out of the house, got into his car, and drove off into the distance. He ended up on the outskirts of town, at an old quarry where he often fished with his father as a child. It was quiet there, except for the sound of the wind in the reeds and the lapping of water against the shore. He sat on the hood of a truck until dark, trying to collect his thoughts. The person he loved, trusted, and considered his salvation turned out not to be who he seemed. Or was he still the same person? Sarah was right. There really was something real between them. But how could he trust someone who had hidden such an important part of his life? His phone was ringing off the hook with calls and messages. Sarah, James, even Pedro had texted to ask if everything was okay. Mark didn't answer anyone. When he finally got home, it was already past midnight. Sarah was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were red from crying. "You're back," she whispered. "This is my house," he replied coldly. "Mark, please let me explain. Let us discuss this." He stopped at the door, not looking at her. "Tomorrow. I'm too tired to think." They spent that night in separate rooms. Mark lay on the sofa in the living room, staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. The same questions kept running through his head. What else was she hiding from him? Could he trust someone who was capable of such lies? And most importantly, how did he feel about her now? In the morning, when Sarah came down to the kitchen, Mark was already sitting at the table with his coffee. She looked as if she hadn't slept all night. "I need to know everything," he said without preamble. "Absolutely everything. If we want to save our marriage, there can be no more secrets." Sarah nodded, wiping away her tears. "Okay, ask me anything." The morning light streaming through the kitchen curtains seemed too bright to Mark. He had been sitting at the table for over an hour, finishing his third cup of coffee and trying to collect his thoughts. Sarah sat across from him, clutching a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "Start at the beginning," Mark said without looking up. "From childhood." Sarah took a deep breath. "I was born in 1996. My parents named me Samuel. From early childhood, I felt out of place. I was 4 when I first told my mom that I was a girl. She decided it was a phase." "And your father?" "My dad was more categorical. He tried to fix me. He made me play sports and forbade me from playing with girls. It became unbearable during my teenage years." Mark finally looked at her. Sarah's face was pale but determined. "When did you start the process?" "When I was 18, I moved to Sacramento to study nursing. That's where I first saw a psychologist. 2 years of therapy, then I started hormone therapy. The surgeries began when I was 22. "Did your parents know?" Sarah shook her head. "I only told them a year after the final surgery. My mom tried to understand, but my dad said he didn't have a child anymore. We didn't speak until he died." "And James?" "James has always been supportive. He saw how hard it was for me as a child. When I returned to Visalia as Sarah, he helped me get a job at the hospital. The chief physician is an old friend of his from college." Mark processed the information. "So you've been living here all these years and no one knew?" "Not everyone. Some old acquaintances suspected, but most people just saw me as James's teacher's sister who had come home after college. Visalia has grown a lot over the years, with many new people moving in, and I've changed a lot physically." "Dr. Graham?" "He moved here 3 years ago when he opened a private practice. I went to him for advice on hormone therapy. He became not only my doctor, but also a friend, I guess. The only person besides James who knew the whole truth." Mark stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, it was the start of a normal day. Neighbors were leaving for work. Children were playing on the lawns. His world seemed just as normal on the outside, but inside, everything had been turned upside down. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked without turning around. "Because I was afraid of losing you. Mark, you came into my life when I thought I would never find true love. Most men, when they found out the truth, left. But you looked at me as if I were the most beautiful woman in the world. But I had a right to know. This concerns both of us." Sarah stood up and walked over to him. "You're right. And I was going to tell you. Dr. Graham always said that honesty is the foundation of a strong relationship. But every time I tried to bring it up, I didn't have the courage. What if I hadn't found those documents? Would you have kept quiet forever?" "I don't know, maybe. Or I would have told you when we decided to have children." Mark turned abruptly. "Children? We even talked about that." You knew it was impossible and you didn't say anything? There are other ways. Adoption, surrogacy. That's not the same thing. It would have been the same to me. Any child we raised together would have been ours. Mark sat down on a chair and buried his face in his hands. I need time. This is too much information. How much time do you need? I don't know. Maybe days, maybe weeks. I need to think about everything. Sarah approached him but didn't dare touch him. Mark, I understand how you feel right now. Anger, disappointment, maybe even disgust. Not disgust, he said quickly. Never disgust. I just don't know what I feel. Yesterday I thought I knew you. Today I realize I don't know you at all. You know me. You know everything about me. What happened before doesn't change what we have. Mark raised his head. What do we have, Sarah? Love? Trust? Or just habit? The question hung in the air without an answer. The next few days passed in agonizing silence. Mark slept in the living room. Sarah left for work early in the morning and returned late at night. They barely spoke, only about everyday things. On the fourth day, James approached Mark near the car repair shop. We need to talk, he said without preamble. If this is about Sarah, of course it's about Sarah. She's my sister, and she's in agony right now. Mark put down his wrench. What about my pain? Doesn't that matter? It does, but at least you know the truth. She doesn't know if she has a future. It was her choice to hide it from me. James sighed. Mark, you're a good man. I've seen how you look at my sister, how you care for her. Can what you've learned really erase all that? It's not that she's transgender. It's that she didn't trust me. Would you have stayed if you'd known the truth from the beginning? Mark fell silent. It was a question that had tormented him all these days. I don't know, he admitted honestly. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I would have had a choice. You have a choice now. That evening, Mark sat in his workshop in the garage, aimlessly sorting through his tools. He heard footsteps and turned around. Sarah stood in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Can I come in? He nodded. She handed him a cup and sat down on an old chair in the corner. I want to show you something, she said, taking an old photograph out of her pocket. This is me at 16. The last photo is Sam. Mark took the picture. It showed a teenager in men's clothes, but with sad eyes and feminine features. See how unhappy I was? Mark studied the photo. Indeed, there was a deep sadness in the teenager's eyes. And this, Sarah took out another photo, was taken a year after the final operation. In this photo was a young woman with sparkling eyes and a genuine smile. Mark recognized his Sarah. It's all in the eyes, he said quietly. Exactly. I became myself. For the first time in my life, I was happy in my own body. Sarah, Mark began, but she interrupted him. Let me finish, please. She took a deep breath. I know I was wrong to hide the truth from you. I know I betrayed your trust. But I want you to understand, I didn't do it out of malice. I did it out of fear of losing the only person who ever loved me for who I am. But I didn't know who you really were. You did. You know my habits, my dreams, my fears. You know how I care about my patients, how I worry about stray animals, how I cry at sad movies. You know me better than anyone has ever known me. Mark put the cup down on the workbench. But there's a difference between who you are now and where you came from. I need the whole picture. Okay, here's the whole picture. Sarah stood up and moved closer to him. I was born in a body that didn't suit me. For 22 years, I lived in hell, pretending to be someone I wasn't. Then I found the courage to change my life. 7 years ago, I became the real Sarah. And a year ago, I met you and felt like a complete woman for the first time, loved and needed. What if you had told me right away? Then we might not have had a chance. Most men aren't ready for a relationship like this. And the few who are often see us as exotic, not as normal women. Mark was silent, digesting her words. You know what scares me the most? Sarah continued. It's not that you'll leave me. It's that you'll look at me differently. That when you hold my hand, you'll see that guy from the photo in your head. Sarah, I'm still the same woman you fell in love with. My body, my voice, my feelings, all of that is real. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my past. Mark stood up and walked over to the window. It was getting dark outside, and the streetlights were coming on. "I need to talk to Dr. Graham," he said finally. "Why?" "I want to hear a professional opinion. Understand the process, the medical side of things." Sarah nodded. "I'll set up an appointment." The next day, Mark sat in Dr. Graham's spacious office. The elderly doctor with gray hair and kind eyes listened attentively to his questions. "I understand your confusion, Mark. It's a normal reaction," said the doctor. "Would you like to know what the gender reassignment process involves from a medical point of view?" "Yes, and I want to understand if Sarah is really a woman. Biologically, I mean." Dr. Graham leaned back in his chair. "That's a complicated question. From a legal and social standpoint, Sarah is a woman. She has all the documents to prove it. From a medical standpoint, the procedures she has undergone have brought her anatomy as close as possible to that of a woman." "And genetically?" "Genetically, she has XY chromosomes, but did you know that there are people who are female in appearance and have XY chromosomes from birth? Or men with XX chromosomes? Biology isn't always as simple as it seems." "So she can't have children?" "No, she can't. But there are many women born female who also can't have children for various reasons. Does that make them less feminine?" Mark thought about it. "What about psychologically? Is her attraction to me real?" "Absolutely real. Mark, I've been observing Sarah for 7 years. She's been through numerous psychological tests and therapies. Her gender identity is not a whim or a phase. It's a fundamental part of who she is." "But why didn't she tell me right away?" Dr. Graham sighed. "Because she was afraid. Transgender people face a tremendous amount of prejudice. Many of them live in constant fear of rejection. Sarah found someone in you who accepted her for who she is. She was afraid of destroying that." "So our relationship is based on a lie?" "No. It's based on who Sarah is now. And right now she's a woman who loves you." After meeting with the doctor, Mark drove around town for a long time, thinking about what he had heard. In the evening, he stopped by James's house. "How did she cope all these years?" he asked without preamble. James poured him a whiskey. "It was tough. The first few years after she returned to Visalia, she hardly socialized with anyone. Work, home, work, home. I was afraid she would never find happiness. And then I came along. Yes, and I saw her blossom. Mark, I've never seen my sister as happy as she is with you. But she didn't trust me. She was afraid. Those are two different things." James sat down opposite him. "Be honest. If you had known the truth from the beginning, would you have dated her?" Mark was silent for a long time. "I don't know. Maybe not. I have my own prejudices that are hard to get rid of." "See? And now you know her. You know what kind of woman she is, what kind of wife. Isn't that more important than her past?" When he got home late that evening, Mark saw Sarah in the kitchen. She was cooking his favorite dinner, steak and potatoes. "I thought you were at work," he said. "I took the day off. I wanted to be home when you got back." She turned to him. "How was your meeting with Dr. Graham?" "Informative." Mark sat down at the table. "Sarah, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly." "Of course." "If you could go back to the past, to the day we met, would you have told me the truth right away?" Sarah turned off the stove and sat down across from him. "Yes. Now that I know what kind of person you are, I would have told you. But back then, I didn't know you. I didn't know if I could trust you. Do you know now? Now I know that you're not the kind of person who runs away at the first sign of trouble. Otherwise, you would have left already." Mark looked at her. The woman he loved, who had become part of his life, his future. Yes, she had hidden important information from him. Yes, it had undermined his trust. But the person sitting in front of him was the same person who had calmed his nightmares, who had supported him in difficult moments, who had become his home. "We need to work on our trust," he finally said. "Yes, we do. And I'll need time to think things through, as much as you need. But I don't want to lose what we have." Sarah cried, out of relief, out of gratitude, out of love. "I don't want to either," she whispered. 2 weeks had passed since Mark told Sarah he was willing to work on their relationship. On the surface, everything was back to normal. They were sleeping in the same bed again, having dinner together, discussing plans for the weekend. But Mark felt something slowly crumbling inside him. Every morning, when he woke up next to Sarah, he didn't see the woman he loved, but the guy in the photo. When she kissed him, he thought of Dr. Graham and the medical procedures. When she talked about the future, about the children they could adopt, Mark felt emptiness where there had once been hope. But the worst part was the nights. Nightmares about the war mixed with images from his hospital records. He would wake up in a cold sweat with Sarah lying next to him, not knowing how he felt about this person. "You're not sleeping well," she remarked one morning as she poured him coffee. "Old nightmares are coming back." "It's nothing," Mark forced a smile. "Maybe you should see a psychologist again? Dr. Graham can recommend a good one." At the mention of Dr. Graham, something tightened in Mark's chest. "No, it's fine. It'll pass." Sarah came over and put her hand on his shoulder. "Mark, I know this is hard for you. If you need to talk..." "I'm fine," he pulled away. "I'm late for work." At the auto repair shop, Mark worked on autopilot. Pedro reprimanded him several times for his inattention, but Mark barely heard him. The same thoughts kept running through his head. How could he have been so blind? How could he not have noticed the signs? And most importantly, what should he do now that he knew? That evening, Mark didn't go home, but drove to the outskirts of town, to an old warehouse complex. A year ago, he had rented a small room there as a workshop, a place where he could work on his motorcycle and other projects in peace. Sarah knew about this place, but had never been there. The workshop was located in a corner of the building, away from the main warehouses. Mark turned on the light and looked around. A workbench, a set of tools, an engine hoist, a welding machine. Everything you need for serious work, and everything that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. He walked over to the massive engine from an old Harley that he had been repairing for several months. The engine was hanging from a chain hoist above the workbench. The chain creaked when Mark nudged the load slightly. Nearly 100 pounds of metal swung in the air. "An accident," he muttered. "The chain broke. No one's to blame." Over the next few days, Mark planned carefully. He studied the warehouse complex's security guard schedule and checked the surveillance cameras. Most of them weren't working, and the ones that were didn't cover his workshop. He filed down one link of the hoist chain, leaving it hanging by a thread. The slightest tug would break the chain. Sarah suspected nothing. Mark had even become more affectionate, hugging her more often and telling her he loved her. She blossomed from the attention, thinking the crisis was over. "You know, I want to arrange a special evening for us," Mark said on Friday morning. "A romantic dinner, just the two of us." "How sweet. Where, at a restaurant?" "No, I want to cook myself. I have an idea." He kissed her on the cheek. "It's a surprise. See you at 7. "Where?" "I'll send you the address. Trust me." Mark spent all day Saturday getting ready. He bought groceries, candles, and good wine. He brought everything to his workshop and set up a makeshift table on his workbench. From a distance, it really looked romantic. Candles, flowers, and fancy food. Only the engine hanging directly above the table on a sawed-off chain disturbed the idyll. At 6:30, Mark sent Sarah a message with the address and wrote, "The workshop is at the end of the corridor. I can't wait to see you." He arrived early and checked the last details. The chain was literally hanging on one link. A sharp movement or strong vibration was enough to cause the engine to crash down. Mark arranged the candles, opened the wine, and turned on soft music from a portable speaker. Then he hid behind a rack of spare parts, from where he could see the entrance but remain unseen. At 7:05, he heard the sound of a car. Then footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a door. "Mark?" Sarah called as she entered the workshop. "My God, how beautiful!" She slowly walked over to the table, admiring the candles and flowers. Mark saw her profile in the flickering light, the familiar features he once considered the most beautiful in the world. "Mark, where are you?" Sarah looked back. "This is really amazing. You've outdone yourself." She walked over to the table and stood directly under the suspended engine. Mark clenched the metal rod he was going to use to hit the chain in his hand. "Mark?" Sarah turned toward him and their eyes met. At that moment, something snapped in Mark's head. Not the chain, it was still holding. Something inside him broke. All the anger, all the disappointment, all the pain of the last few weeks burst out. "Are you happy now?" he asked, stepping out from behind the rack. Sarah flinched at his tone. "Mark, what's going on? You're scaring me." "I'm scaring you? Do you know what scares me? Lies, deception, living with someone I don't really know." "What are you talking about? We talked about everything. You said you were willing to work on our relationship." "I lied." Mark slowly approached her. "Just like you lied to me. Turns out it's easier than I thought." Sarah backed away, but the table was behind her. "Mark, please, let's talk calmly." "Calmly? Was that calm when you told me about your past? Or did you calmly plan our future knowing it was all based on a lie?" "It's not a lie. I'm the same Sarah." "No!" Mark shouted so loudly that Sarah flinched. "You're not the same. You're someone else. You're a man who decided to play a woman." "This isn't a game. I've always been a woman." "Always?" Mark laughed bitterly. "What about Samuel? What about the guy who lived in your body for 22 years? That guy didn't exist. It was a mask, a role I played. What if you're playing that role now? What if the woman Sarah is just another mask?" Sarah began to cry. "Mark, you don't understand. I've never been happier than I am with you. You gave me the chance to be myself." "Yourself? Who are you really? A woman? A man? Something in between?" "I'm your wife, the person who loves you." "My wife wouldn't lie to me." Mark grabbed the metal bar. "My wife wouldn't build our marriage on a lie." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you." "It's the same thing." Mark raised the bar, aiming at the chain. Sarah followed his gaze and noticed the engine hanging above her for the first time. "Mark, what are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago. I'm ending this lie." "Please don't! We can fix this." "Nothing can be fixed. You killed the man I loved. Now it's my turn." Sarah tried to run away from the table, but Mark blocked her way. "Mark, I beg you, think about what we had. It was real." "Real?" Mark stopped. "What was real about it? Your feelings, your body, your love. It was all the result of surgery and hormones." "My feelings are real. My love for you is real. Love built on lies can't be real." With that, Mark struck the chain with the rod. The metal clanged, and the filed link snapped. The heavy engine crashed down. Sarah tried to jump aside, but it was too late. 100 pounds of metal fell on her, pinning her to the table. The sound was terrifying, the crunch of bones, the clang of metal on concrete, then silence. Mark stood nearby, breathing heavily. Sarah lay under the engine, her eyes open but unmoving. A pool of blood slowly spread beneath her head. For several minutes, he just stared at what he had done. Then his instinct for self-preservation kicked in. He had to act quickly. Mark took his fingerprints off the metal bar and threw it into a trash can on the street. Then he returned to the workshop and carefully wiped down all the surfaces he could touch. He put away the candles and food. It had to look like an accident, not a romantic dinner. After thinking about it, he decided to leave the flowers. Sarah might come here to surprise him. She would find the flowers he had probably bought for her, come closer to look at them, and tragedy would strike. Mark checked his phone. No messages or calls. Good. He deleted his messages with Sarah from today, then wrote a new message, dating it to the time he was supposed to be home. "Waiting for you at home. I've got a surprise for you." Then he left the workshop and drove to a 24-hour supermarket on the other side of town. He bought groceries for dinner and paid with his card. The receipt would be part of his alibi. The timing worked out so that he was in the store at the exact time the accident happened. At home, Mark took a shower, changed his clothes, and started cooking dinner. At 9:30, he sent Sarah another message. "Where are you? Dinner is getting cold." At 10, he called her. Of course, no one answered. At 10:30, Mark dialed 911. "Ambulance? My wife isn't coming home. She's not answering her phone. I'm worried something has happened to her." The dispatcher explained that an adult could only be considered missing after 24 hours, but Mark insisted. He gave the address of the workshop as one of the places where Sarah might be. An hour later, a police car arrived at the warehouse complex. Mark met them at the entrance, pretending to be a frightened husband. "She knew about this place. Maybe she decided to surprise me," he explained to the officers. When they entered the workshop and discovered the body, Mark burst into tears. The tears were real, from relief, from horror at what he had done, from the realization that there was no way back. "My God, Sarah!" he cried, trying to run to the body. The police held him back. "Sir, don't go near it. This is a crime scene." "What crime? It was an accident. That damn chain broke." One of the officers examined the scene. "It looks like an accident. The chain was old. A link broke. The victim was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Mark continued to sob, clinging to the wall. Relief and horror fought inside him. He had done it. He had killed the man he once loved. But now the lie was over for good. Detective Rita Henson arrived at the scene an hour after the first officers arrived. At 45, she had a reputation as one of the most experienced investigators in the Visalia Police Department. In her 20 years on the job, she had learned to notice details that others missed. Mark sat in the police car, wrapped in a blanket. His sobbing had subsided, but his face was still red from crying. "Mr. Johnson?" Hanson approached him with her notepad. "I'm very sorry for your loss. I know this is difficult for you, but I need to ask you a few questions." Mark looked up. "I already told the officers everything. I understand, but I'm in charge of this case and I need details." Henson sat down next to him. "Tell me what happened tonight." "I was at home cooking dinner. I was waiting for Sarah. She didn't come, didn't answer her phone. I got worried and went out to look for her. I knew she sometimes went to my workshop. How often did your wife visit your workshop?" Mark hesitated for a second. "Rarely, but she knew where it was." "Why would she go there?" "I don't know. Maybe she wanted to surprise me, or she was looking for me thinking I was working there." Henson wrote down every word. "What did you do this afternoon?" "I worked at the auto repair shop until 5. Then I went to the supermarket to get some groceries, came home, and started cooking." "Do you have the receipts from the store?" "Yes, of course." Mark took out his wallet and showed her the receipt. The time on it was 7:45 p.m. While Henson questioned Mark, forensic experts examined the workshop: a broken chain, a heavy engine, traces of blood. At first glance, everything pointed to an accident. "Detective Henson," one of the technicians called her over. "Look here." She walked over to where Sarah's body lay. "What did you find?" "Flowers. A bouquet was lying on the floor next to the victim. It's strange that a woman would bring flowers to herself." Henson frowned. "Maybe her husband left them there earlier?" "Possibly, but look at the petals. They're fresh. This bouquet was bought today." "Mr. Johnson," Henson called out, "are these flowers yours?" Mark approached as if forcing himself to look at the scene of the tragedy. "Yes, I bought them for Sarah. I wanted to surprise her, so I brought them to the workshop this morning." "This morning? But you said you were at the auto shop all day." "I stopped by before work. I wanted to decorate the workshop for her." Henson wrote down the explanation, but something about it bothered her. The next few days were spent following standard investigative procedures. The medical examiner confirmed that Sarah's death was caused by multiple injuries incompatible with life. The time of death was between 7 and 8 in the evening. This coincided with Mark's alibi, but Henson continued to dig deeper. She spoke with Pedro Vasquez. "Mark is a good worker," Pedro said. "But he's been acting strange the last few weeks, distracted, and he's left work early a few times. Said he had family problems." "What kind of problems?" "I don't know, he didn't say, but you could tell something was bothering him." Henson also met with James Taylor. Sarah's brother looked devastated. "I don't understand what she was doing in that workshop," he said. "Sarah was never interested in technology. She avoided places like that. Too much dust and dirt." "How were things between Sarah and Mark lately?" James hesitated. "There were some difficulties. Mark recently found out about Sarah's past, about her being transgender." Henson raised an eyebrow. "How did he react?" "It was difficult at first, but he seemed to have accepted it. Sarah said they were working on their relationship." "Did Sarah mention any threats? Strange behavior from her husband?" "No, nothing like that. Although," James thought for a moment, "she seemed tense last week. She said Mark was being overly nice, as if he was trying to make up for something." This piqued Henson's interest. She decided to talk to Dr. Graham. "Mark took the news about Sarah's past very hard," the doctor confirmed. "When he came to see me, I could see the inner conflict. Outwardly, he said all the right things, but his body language told a different story." "What do you mean?" tension, avoidance of direct eye contact when the conversation turned to his future with Sarah. As a professional, I would say that he hadn't accepted the situation and was simply trying to convince himself otherwise. Do you consider him capable of violence? Dr. Graham paused. He has post-traumatic stress disorder. Under certain circumstances, that can lead to uncontrollable outbursts of aggression. Henson returned to studying the crime scene. Something about the official version didn't sit right with her. She examined the chain of the hoist closely. "Strange," she muttered, studying the broken link through a magnifying glass. "What's strange?" asked the forensic scientist. "This break. See these marks on the metal? They don't look like natural wear and tear, more like mechanical impact. You think the chain was cut? Possibly. We need a metal analysis." The results of the analysis came back a week later. The conclusion was clear. The chain link had been weakened by mechanical force. Someone had deliberately filed it down, leaving it hanging by a thread. Henson called Mark to the station for further questioning. "Mr. Johnson, the analysis shows that the chain was deliberately damaged. This is no longer an accident, but murder." Mark turned pale. "What? Who could have done this?" "Good question. Did your wife have any enemies?" "No, everyone loved her. She was a nurse. She helped people." "Who had access to the workshop?" "Only me. I have the only key." "So either the killer broke the lock or had access to the key. The lock wasn't damaged." Mark nervously fiddled with his sleeves. "Maybe I dropped the key somewhere? Or someone made a copy." "Mr. Johnson, I need to know the truth about your relationship with your wife. James Taylor told me about recent problems in your marriage. Yes, there were difficulties, but we were working through them." "Working through them? How exactly did you react when you found out your wife was transgender?" Mark fell silent, staring at the floor. "It was a shock, but I loved her." "You loved her enough to forgive her for cheating on you?" "It wasn't cheating. It was just a complicated situation." Henson studied his face. "Mr. Johnson, where were you between 6 and 8 p.m. on the day your wife died?" "I told you I was at home cooking dinner." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I was alone." "When did you go to the supermarket?" "Around 8 p.m. But the receipt shows 7:45 p.m. That's a quarter to 8, not around 8. Mark blinked in confusion. "Yes, you're right. I don't remember very well. I was in shock." "So between 6 and quarter to 8, you have almost 2 hours without an alibi. That's enough time to drive to the workshop, meet your wife, and come back." "I didn't kill Sarah." "Then explain to me, Mr. Johnson, why your wife went to the workshop. James says she avoided places like that." Mark remained silent, clenching his fists. "And you know what else is strange?" Henson continued. "The flowers. You said you brought them in the morning, but the florist remembers you. You bought that bouquet on Saturday afternoon, just before your wife died." "I made a mistake. I brought them in the afternoon, not the morning." "Mr. Johnson, I think you lured your wife into the workshop under the pretext of a romantic dinner. You set a trap with a sawed-off chain, and when she arrived, you carried out your plan." "That's nonsense. Why would I kill my own wife?" "Because you couldn't accept the truth about her past. Because you felt betrayed. Because your male ego couldn't take it." Mark jumped up from his chair. "You don't understand. I loved her." "Loved her? Or hated her for lying?" Mark paused, breathing heavily. "Mr. Johnson, we have a motive, evidence, and no alibi. I advise you to tell the truth." Mark slumped back into his chair and covered his face with his hands. The room was silent for several minutes. "She ruined my life," he whispered finally. "I thought I had found the perfect woman. I had plans for the future, and it turns out I've been living a lie all this time." "So you killed her?" "I didn't plan it. I just wanted to talk, to get everything off my chest. But when she started saying that nothing had changed, that she was still the same, I couldn't take it anymore." "What happened in the workshop?" "We had an argument. She was standing under the engine, and I hit the chain. I didn't even think about the consequences. I just wanted the lies to end." Henson wrote down every word. "Mr. Johnson, do you understand that you are confessing to murder?" Mark nodded without looking up. I understand, I don't care. Without her, life has no meaning, and I couldn't live with her knowing the truth. An hour later, Mark Johnson was officially arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The news shook Visalia. A war veteran, a quiet, hard worker, had killed his own wife because he couldn't accept her past. The entire medical staff of the hospital, James's colleagues, and old friends gathered at Sarah's funeral. Mark sat in his prison cell, staring into space. For the first time in weeks, the nightmares about the war receded. They were replaced by nightmares about that evening in the workshop. The trial was set for the fall. The lawyer talked about temporary insanity, post-traumatic stress, mitigating circumstances. But Mark wasn't listening anymore. He knew his life had ended the moment the chain broke, and the engine fell on the only person who had ever truly loved him. In his cell, he often thought about Sarah's last words. "My feelings are real. My love for you is real." Maybe she was right. Maybe love was real, regardless of everything else. But now it was too late to change anything. Detective Henson closed the case, but she couldn't forget the story for a long time. Another life destroyed by prejudice and an inability to accept differences. Another tragedy that could have been prevented if people had learned to see each other not as threats, but simply as other people striving for happiness. Visalia gradually forgot about this story. But in the city's medical circles, people continued to talk about Sarah Taylor, the talented nurse who had helped hundreds of people and was killed by a man who couldn't accept her for who she was.